All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Ways Senior Leaders Accidentally Undermine Behavior Change, brought to you by Insignia Training Partners. My name is Bernie DeSantis. I'm the CEO of Insignia Training Partners. We are a full-service fractional learning and development company, and I'll be your producer today. We do intend for this to be an interactive and engaging webinar, so please participate in the chat, utilize the Q&A feature for questions. We will also be using the annotation tool today. In order to access that, you can click on the green pencil in the screen share window when it's up, or at the top of your viewing window where you see you are viewing Bernie's screen. You'll just click View Options, Annotate, and then select the stamp feature to annotate when asked. So with that, let me introduce our speaker today, Ms. Lauren Brownstone. Lauren is a learning and an enablement advisor, author, and consultant, as well as a fractional chief learning officer for Insignia Training Partners. She's also a thought leader in organizational culture and behavior change. She's passionate about improving our workplaces for everyone. Lauren is committed to empowering every single individual in the organization to raise their consciousness, bring their best selves to work, and become their best versions of themselves. Lauren lives with her husband and dog in the Chicago area. With that, Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone for coming today. I'm so excited to do this webinar with everyone. So Bernie has put a participant guide in the chat. If you wouldn't mind just taking a moment, grabbing that. This is your guide to what we're going to be covering. There's space for you to take notes throughout, and I'll kind of guide you to where we are as we go along. So thank you for coming. And let's start talking about how senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change. Thank you. All right, so today we're going to be talking about behavior change, why it's important, how we get there. We're going to talk about this unique moment and why we need to understand the environment so much of the environment in which we're trying to change that behavior. Then we're going to get into the ways we see senior leaders undermining behavior change, and then we can talk about what we can do about it. It doesn't matter if you're a leader, a senior leader, a manager, an individual contributor. I know we also have a lot of folks on this call today from learning and enablement teams. This can also help you. So, measuring behavior change is part of how we measure organizational learning. And we do that through the Kirkpatrick model. And so you'll see at the top of your handout, feel free to take notes around it if you need. Really, Kirkpatrick is considered best practice for measuring organizational learning. So I'm going to take you through this modified version of that model that I use. These are the different ways that we measure, right? So if we start at the bottom, we can measure effort and say, this is the effort that went into something. We ran 100 training sessions with 400 learners in 3 global locations. We have 6 new job aids, those kind of numbers. If we move up a level, we can look at reaction. This is the reaction of our learners. Did they like the learning? Did they feel like it was valuable? Do they intend to apply what they learned to their daily habits? Then we measure the actual learning. And here are the 2 things we're really going to focus on today: learning and behaviors. Because if they don't learn it, then they can't implement it in the actual daily doing of the job. So learning, we measure through assessments. And for example, think of like a training. We want to know if people can actually do the skill that we're trying to get them to learn. So we measure that in the training. And then depending on how well they do in that training, that kind of informs how much behavior change we can expect. That's where we're going to measure those behaviors. And that's the crux of what we're talking about today. To give you a sense of the fuller model, these are the behaviors that are essential for organizational performance. And from there, we can also measure the ROI of the entire intervention or program. So as a review, we're focusing on learning because learning informs behaviors and behaviors inform organizational performance. So let's talk specifically about behavior change for a second. Behavior change is the actual doing of the skill to get those results. It can be a change to something that's been happening for a while, or it can be something completely new. Behavior change is the exhibition of the skill on the job in the regular course of work. So are they doing the thing to get the organizational performance, right? So learning is a prerequisite for behavior change. That's what I want your takeaway to be here. All right. So achieving behavior change now matters more than ever. The world is moving faster, tools come and go, and strategies come and go even faster. And as strategies, tools, and processes shift, we need people to be able to behave differently. We need them no longer, we don't hire a well-trained workforce anymore. We hire someone who's trained and is retrainable and retrainable and retrainable again, because the half-life of a skill is only a couple years now. Because of this, I think that learning and enablement functions are the single most critical function in the business. Everything we do depends on behavior, and behavior depends on learning. So this is the most important thing that we have to pay attention to. So now I want you to think about your organization. Do you know how much behavior change you get now? Go ahead and throw it in the chat. You can put it if you know if you get behavior change, if you don't know how much behavior change you get. And if you're feeling like it, you can tell us how much behavior change you typically get. Yeah, it's very common that organizations don't know how much behavior change they get. This is a really important number to know. Yes, we can measure it concretely in some ways. Yes, especially sales performance. That's very common. Yep. It does vary by initiative. Absolutely. 40%. Yeah, I think that's pretty common, pretty typical. Ah, Michelle. Yeah, I think you're spot on. A lot of folks don't know how much behavior change they get. All right. So here's what I want to tell you. I think about 30–40% is pretty typical, but 80–90% is possible. And you can do that consistently. Now, some organizations will achieve 80–90% behavior change occasionally, but sometimes they do that at great cost. Excuse me. To do this consistently, I'm sorry, let me take a sip. To achieve 80–90%, excuse me, behavior change consistently, you have to implement what I've been calling the bedrock. These are the conditions that have to be met for consistent, strong rates of behavior change in any organization. These are the cultural competencies, the organizational competencies that have to be present. And if you have those things, then you can do 80–90%, and you can do it consistently. But without those things present, it's really, really hard to do that. Now, at the end of this webinar, you can have exclusive early access to my Bedrock checklist. This is what your organization needs to do to accomplish the Bedrock. Leaders, this will get you the results that you're looking for. Retaining your employees, incredible, incredible performance. Learning and enablement, this is going to help you improve at your job. The benefits just compound over time. You'll be leading behavior change and holding senior leaders accountable for their role in facilitating it. And it's going to set you up for those incredible results that get you promoted. Anyone else on here? This can help you too. It'll help you self-advocate so you can feel as good as you can going through organizational changes and self-advocating as demands change and you need new skills. So now that we understand what behavior change is, let's take a look at the environments in which we need to be changing behavior. We need to look at the environmental context because our collective experiences bring out profound change. In these last few years, we know we've gone through some, right? We have to understand the people whose behavior we're actually trying to change. So first, let's take a look at our intergenerational workforce. Probably no real surprise here. We know it's largely millennials and Gen X. What's interesting is that this year is the year that Gen Z is supposed to surpass the number of baby boomers in the workforce. This is a transitional, transformative year, if you will. Now, on the right there, you see I called out the sandwich generation. That's not typically one of these generations like we talk about on the left side of the screen, right? But the sandwich generation, I think, is important to call out because these are the people who are taking care of they're often taking care of parents while they're also raising their kids. So they call them the sandwich because they're in between, right? And this tells us about people's priorities outside of work, what they're going through and dealing with. The other call out I want to make is on our next slide, and that's about mental health. Significant mental health challenges are in our workforce right now, specifically depression and anxiety. Most of the numbers, these included, by the way, I should remark, are numbers for the US. There are some global numbers in here, but I know that most of our audience is in the US. So it matters that we know what's going on with our workforce's mental health because negative thought patterns make it harder for people to engage, makes it harder for them to feel safe. They might need encouragement. They might be less likely to speak up. This impacts our work. The next thing I want to call out is that our workforce is neurodivergent. We have ADHD and autism. This matters because these folks process information differently. They might need clearer instructions. We might have to accommodate how they process and make decisions. And remember, back to Kirkpatrick, we can't change behavior without first accomplishing learning. So how people process information, making sure they understand it is very, very important. All right, so this gets us into our first way that senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change. Unconscious leadership. First of all, unconscious leadership is really costly. Poor leadership is very expensive. You take hits to revenue, turnover, we see productivity drags. In the US, we think that costs about $1 trillion a year. Globally, that number is about 7 trillion. Conscious leadership is all about self-awareness, EQ, recognizing and inspiring connectedness, being empathic, exercising that growth mindset that says, I can always learn, I can do more, I can improve, I can grow. And that requires leaders to know who they are, to know what they stand for, to be authentic, to be inspiring, and to be purpose-driven. So in the chat, tell me, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like to have conscious leadership? Or conscious leaders? What does that look, sound, and feel like in the workplace? Yeah, some great comments coming in. Safer, more productive, asking how they can support you. These are great comments. Yes, there's a feeling of connection. There's a connection to your work. There's a connection to your colleagues. There's a connection to the mission of the organization. Oh, I like that. The leader's quiet. They're asking for other folks. What do they think? Listening for feedback. Oh, this is fantastic. Psychological safety. Yes, we're talking about that today. Honestly, yeah. Yeah, this is great. Mentoring, coaching, where you can trust. People are going to do what they say. Yeah, they walk the talk. I like that. Yeah, this is great. They know you personally. They take an interest. This is fantastic. Good examples of the compassion and empathy we see in conscious leaders. So now that we understand what conscious leadership looks like, let's take a look at what unconscious leadership looks like. It looks like low trust, a prioritization of short-term gains, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and also conflating management with leadership. Remember, managers, they do one-on-ones, they assign work, they approve PTO, they cascade communications. Leaders, on the other hand, have vision. They're inspirational. They're role models in the organization. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader, and you don't have to be a leader to be a manager. We're talking about two different things here. Low trust in particular appears to be driven by a dearth of integrity. We see 46% of employees don't trust their manager to do what is right. Or sorry, only 46% do trust their manager to do what is right. And if we look at senior leaders, that's even lower at 32%. McKinsey did a study that they published in 2023. They looked at 30,000 employees in 30 different countries, and they wanted to see, how do we encourage holistic health? Their central question was, how do we do that in organizations? And they defined holistic health as physical, mental, social, and spiritual in nature. And they looked at 2 categories of factors to see how they played the role in here. They looked at demands, which are workplace factors that require sustained effort, like workload, role ambiguity, job insecurity, toxic workplace behavior. And then they looked at enablers of holistic health, the things that provide us with positive energy. They offset those demands, like self-efficacy, psychological safety, leadership commitment, and supervisor support. Let's take a look at the findings of this study. The top factors predicting holistic health, all enablers. And they were 14 times more predictive than the demands. On the other side, the top factors predicting burnout were not low levels of enablers. They were all demands, and they were 7 times more predictive of burnout. So these things matter. So what are our takeaways from this study? The more positive, affirming actions we engage with, the more we're creating an organization that enables holistic health. And the more demands we engage in, the more we're setting up people for burnout. So senior leaders need to invest their time and energy in generating holistic health, affirming, accepting, and supporting all their people. Healthier people learn more easily, and burnout symptoms include cognitive impairment. That makes it harder for us to learn. Can't learn, can't change behavior. When we're unconscious and don't know what we stand for, we behave inconsistently. That's when we tend to give into bad behavior and empower the toxic elements in our organizations, the narcissists, manipulators, liars, bullies. These people undermine that positive, energy-giving, enabling attributes that we talked about. Toxic workplace behavior was actually number 1 on the last slide in predicting burnout. We're going to talk more about that a little bit. So we all need to become conscious leaders, and we all can be leaders. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader. So here's how we can do it. We have to visualize this, and we're not going to do this live on this call because I think that would be a really fun separate call maybe, and it would take too much time. But I want you to imagine the future that you want. Imagine the future that you want, and then you're going to become the person who belongs in that future, who co-creates and contributes to that future. And the way you do that is aligning your intentions, words, and actions. That's integrity. That's the leadership trust stuff we were looking at. It also means investing in developing your critical leadership competencies and exploring more purpose and meaning in your work. So, in the chat, what can you do personally in your role to help develop conscious leadership in your organization? What can you do personally to help develop conscious leadership in your org? I'll give it a moment for a few answers to come in before we go through them. These are excellent answers. Modeling the desired behavior, being the change we want to see, right? Building a reflective practice. Becca, I love that. If you build a reflective practice around your work, you can become more self-aware of what you're doing well, what you might do differently. Advocating for yourself and others is excellent. Yeah, keeping your values top of mind. Yeah, showing up in alignment. I love that. These are fantastic answers. All right, which brings us to the next one. Oh, and I like this last one that came in. Rewarding appropriate behavior and punishing wrong behaviors. I love it. I love it. We want to reinforce what we want and not reinforce what we don't want to see. I love it. All right. So number two, the number two way senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change is short-sighted thinking. The opposite of short-sighted thinking is playing the long game. Now, why do we want to play the long game? Because it helps the long-term health of the organization. It helps us retain employees who are skilled, engaged, and productive. And once we have that, we can have a beautiful internal talent pipeline. It strengthens the employer brand and reputation. And it also builds the organizational capacity to act with agility and resilience. All of the above make for a workforce that can learn and change their behavior. Remember, I said earlier, occasionally orgs can achieve 80 to 90%, but at great cost. That's what I'm talking about. If you want to achieve it consistently, we need to play the long game. So what does short-sighted thinking look like? It looks like layoffs, quick cost cutting, short-term relief on payroll, and it hurts morale, drives disengagement, drags productivity. Delaying or ignoring employee learning and development means they don't have the necessary skills that they need. Also, low engagement, low productivity, and you're going to have trouble attracting and retaining your top talent. Overworking people leads to burnout, hurts morale, drives turnover, right? You're seeing a pattern here, right? Also, exercising favoritism, promoting people out of expediency and bending to squeaky wheels, hurts morale, drives disengagement, hurts productivity, all these things. I heard a story just last week. Someone who's promoted to lead the team she had been on, and everyone on the team was going to report to her. And when she saw the work chart, she noticed that somebody who she had been working with, she was now leading that team, was not going to report to her. He was going to report directly past her to her boss. So she asked her boss, why did this happen? And her boss said, well, that person's a pretty high performer, and I don't think he would like reporting to you. This is short-sighted thinking. The short-term advantages of this decision that her boss made are that he doesn't have to deal with an unhappy high performer. He'll probably retain him. But let's take a look at the long game here. What are the long-term disadvantages? It's more workload for that individual because now he has another person reporting to him. He's also undermined a sense of trust and authority in this newly promoted leader. He told her, I don't hold you in that high of esteem. And he told her team, well, you can undermine her, because that's kind of what I just did going around her. The team knows that they can get away now with bad behavior if they perform well enough, if they complain loud enough. The loss of trust in the higher up who made the decision is going to be significant here. And that's another part of the long-term game. All of this, everything in this situation, it's going to hurt morale, it's going to hurt productivity, it's going to hurt the reputation of the company. This is short-sighted thinking. So why does short-sighted thinking happen? Let's keep continuing with the example I just shared. That higher up who made the decision was probably unaware of the dynamics he was causing. He probably didn't recognize that he was doing all those things. He probably didn't recognize that others might perceive that gender might be a factor. He probably wasn't living into his values in making that decision, but he failed to recognize it. We can also talk about incentive structures that reward short-term outcomes at the expense of longer-term sustainability. We see this from shareholders and investors. Often we see senior leaders are only in their role for a year or two before they're promoted or they leave for another opportunity. So they're looking for quick wins with an immediate impact instead of delving into larger, more complex systemic challenges. There's a misalignment of incentives to show something this year when they might not be here for the hard part later. More on the pressure for immediate results. This comes from boards, right? They care about stock prices. They want to know about this month, this quarter, this year. There's also sometimes a lack of clear long-term vision or strategy. And that means that we only have the short term to guide us. There is no broader roadmap. So it gets back to that conscious leadership, right? Inspirational, has vision, all that stuff. And finally, this is true for larger organizations typically, there's too many silos. And that means that people can't see the big picture. And so often there's a mismanagement of resources. Now let's explore what longer term thinking looks like. Minimal layoffs, no layoffs just for cost cutting. We're going to honor tenure and performance, not one of those checked box gifts. That's very different from actually acknowledging someone's hard work and contributions and sacrifices. It also means that we make the shift to skills-based throughout the organization. When it comes to hiring, career pathing, development, performance management, all of these things need to be skills-based. They force us to think in the long term. They're also investments in the long term. I can't tell you how many organizations I talk to today who are not skills-based. We've been hearing about this for almost 10 years. We need to make the shift. So how do we shift to long-term so we can build strong internal talent pipelines with highly skilled and engaged workforces? We have to recognize the short-term thinking and call it out for what it is. Challenge it. We can do better. Align our incentives with longer-term visions and actions, and committing to invest in people and bringing out the best in them. That's one of the best things we can do. So, in the chat, what can you do in your role, whatever your role is, to encourage longer range thinking? What can you do in your role to encourage longer range thinking? Dave, I like that. We keep focusing on the vision. What is the bigger picture? What is the bigger plan? Our organizational mission and values. I love that. Asking questions that challenge the short-sightedness. I like that. I like that. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going, but I know there are so many things that all of us on this call we can do. All right, so our next way that senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change is a lack of investment in core skill development. What are core skills? You've heard the term soft skill or human skill, all the same thing. These are the skills that benefit you in every role. They benefit all of us. They make us better people. Fun fact, they also drive innovation. We need these skills more than ever. These are the things that make us better people in our world right now. We need better people. We need to become the leaders that we need. And when we have low levels of these skills, take a look at the list on the right side of the slide. Throw in the chat. What do we see when we have low levels of these skills? What happens? Yep. Becca says breakdowns in just about everything. An unhappy workforce, less creativity. Yes, these hurt innovation, right? We don't have them. Turnover, knee-jerk reactions. Absolutely, playing that short game. Lots of conflict, no vision, lack of follow-through. These are fantastic. All right, so not only do we have a very strong need for these skills, but there's also a really high demand for these skills. Employees want to be developed. They know they need to keep up their skills in this competitive market. They know they have to keep growing. Employees want to be developed, and They walk the walk with that demand. Employees don't stick around as often when they're not developed. And they leave. Sorry, employees stick around when they're developed and they leave when they're not. And if McKinsey did a study that they released last year, I think it was within the last year that they were looking at it, people leaving their jobs. And they looked at subsets of each generation in the workforce. So they divided, we have younger millennials, older millennials, younger baby boomer, whatever. So they looked at these and they said, what are the top reasons that people are leaving jobs? And for every single subset of every generation they looked at, a lack of career development and advancement potential was the number one or number two reason. Employees want these skills. They want to be developed. So we have the need, we have the demand. Let's take a look at the payoff for developing core skills. It is huge. Companies with solid core skill programs, we often dub these leadership development programs, are more likely to be top performers in their industry. The ROI for these is consistently 250% and up for strong programs, particularly for coaching programs. I've seen numbers between 400 and 800% for the ROI of coaching. This stuff is important. We need it. There's demand for it, and the payoff is huge. We got to do it, right? Throw in the chat. How can you support core skill development in your org? Yeah, we can attend things that help us learn these skills. Yeah. We can own our own development and go to them ourselves. We can encourage the team to do that. Tuition assistance programs are great. Career coaching. Internal coaches are great. Ooh, communities of practice. There are lots and lots and lots of ways that we can support our own development, specifically of core skills. And because we need them in every role and in every part of our lives, we can kind of always practice them. Kind of cool. All right, so jumping back in, I want you to recall that this is the critical moment for learning and enablement functions. This is our moment. This is our time. So the number four way that senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change is not realizing the centrality of the learning function. We need to behave like we appreciate this reality. We need learning teams we need these teams more than ever. They are business critical. We have to realize the centrality of this function. So how do we do that? We hire people with a learning background. Behavior change is an expertise. Other functions hire people with that expertise, especially if they're leading the function, right? Now, often in learning and enablement, we don't see that. We hire people without that learning background. Why does that happen? Often I'm told, well, that person's already been training folks already. It's a natural progression for them. There's also this societal mentality of those who can't do, teach. It's not a global mentality, but we see it here. And often organizations don't want to lose someone. They like that person. They're strong for the organization, but they need a different role. And so they put them on one of these teams, and that's fine. I'm all about lateral moves. That's a fantastic way to retain your talent, especially your top talent. That's a fantastic way to do it. The challenge is when we make lateral moves, we have bigger gaps in our skill set. And in this case, they have a giant skill gap in the central function of the role of changing behavior. So if you're looking for a head of learning or enablement, I think you need a minimum of 5 to 10 years of experience specifically in learning. The other thing senior leaders can do is to treat their learning professionals as the professionals they are. Give them a seat at the table. Bring them in early. Don't give them orders, right? You give orders, they take orders. It's this order-taking mentality. We don't like that. Open your learning folks to the situation and changing circumstances and listen for their expert consultation. This means not giving those orders, right? It means you can share your preferences. We like asynchronous learning. Okay, great. We care about your preferences, but we also have to balance that with what we know leads to learning and behavior change. The other challenge with taking orders here is that the most common order that we get or request that we get is, hey, I need a training on fill in the blank. And the challenge here is that training is only the solution about 10 to 20% of the time. And because training is what people tend to know, that's what they tend to ask us for. But you hired us as learning experts. You don't know what solution you need. That's why you need our expertise. If it was up to learning folks, everything would be a training and the goals wouldn't be accomplished. So trust us to come in and help you get the wins that you're looking for. The other way we do this is senior leaders listen better. Recognize the expertise. Why is this team proposing the solution that they are? What are the best practices? What can you do to ensure the strongest outcomes? But number one is professionally staffing your learning function. If you don't have the talent to lead your learning and development or enablement function, or if you want advice, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Bernie. Now, in the chat, has your org realized the centrality of learning and enablement? And if not, how can you change that? Has your organization realized the centrality of learning and enablement functions? And if not, what can you do about it? Wait for a couple more responses here. So I see a yes and a no, I don't think I could make that happen with my boss. Yeah, we got to align our words with our actions. We get a lot of lip service. Dave's calling out that there's genuine interest, but it's really hard to move. Yeah, and trumpeting our successes is a great way to do that. Data is a great way to do that. Becca says that sometimes there's more requests for consultations to discuss the need before they talk about deliverables. And yeah, that's exactly how learning enablement teams should work. Bring us in early, bring us in often, explain what's going on. We'll tell you about the solution. Exactly. All right, which brings us to our number 5 way that senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change. And that is, you might have noticed a theme today, an insufficient investment in culture. Everything we're talking about influences culture. Talked about conscious leadership, talked about core skills, thinking in the long term. Everything influences culture. So what is culture? It's the thing that's everywhere, that's invisible, but impacts everything. It's the water in the fish tank. That's the analogy I like. The fish is never really aware that they're in the water, but it guides them, supports them, nourishes them. And when it's healthy, everything goes great and you don't really notice it. But if you introduce toxicity to that environment, what happens to the fish tank? That toxicity builds up and it strangles. Culture is constantly co-created. No individual owns it. We all do collectively. We are all part of the organization. But senior leaders have an outsized impact on culture. And that's because when we're looking for what is acceptable and allowed and good and rewarded in the organization, we tend to look at our peers and folks above us in their hierarchy. So the higher folks are in the hierarchy, the more impact they have here. They're the ones who tell us what's expected, what's allowed, what's acceptable, what's tolerated. Someone in the chat earlier called out, what behaviors are we rewarding? What behaviors are we reinforcing? That's exactly what we're talking about here. Back to conscious leadership. Words and actions carry weight. Actions speak louder than words. And we need our words to align with our actions. Good culture, finally, fosters innovation. It creates the circumstances in which innovation can happen. If you're in a toxic environment, it's hard to be creative. It's hard to think critically. It's harder to do those things. So let's look at specific behaviors that influence culture. We need to stop pushing the more button. People are doing their best. Remember those factors that lead to burnout from the McKinsey study? This was high on there. People are doing their best. We know about the mental health crisis. We are ripping at the seams, and work is not our entire lives. So what can we do better? What can we do for our people to say thank you, to acknowledge and reward their sacrifices and successes for the organization, to honor them, and to show them that they're more than just a number? And I would argue, we really just need to treat people right. Showing dignity, grace, kindness, and respect, non-negotiables, right? Respecting that people are whole people and not just workers. They have lives outside of work, and being fair and transparent in our decisions. All of this, by the way, fosters a psychologically safe environment. And that is a very important component here in influencing culture. So, what is psychological safety? Amy Edmondson defines it as a belief that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. In the chat, I know most of us are very familiar, not new to this concept. So in the chat, I want you to put, what does a psychologically safe environment look, sound, and feel like? How do you know if you're in a psychologically safe environment? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? We can all relate to this, right? Yeah, it can look like acknowledging when you mess up. Yeah, just simply saying that because it's safe to say it. You won't get in trouble. Non-toxic behavior, empowering people to grow. Ooh, you don't have that stomach ache. A deeper connection to your teammates, your work, and the organization. Collaboration, discussion, proactive collaboration. Able to speak your mind without fear of reprisal. Ideas are validated, not ignored. Oh, this is fantastic. You guys are wonderful. You know all about how we can make great cultures and what the safety feels like. All right, let's keep going. I've got a quick poll for you, but just to summarize, are you hearing echoes of conscious leadership in the chat right now? Collaboration, speaking your mind, being reflective. This isn't new, right? These are all building on each other. So let's go to the poll. And you're going to use the annotations for this. I want to know who is responsible for psychological safety. Who is responsible for it? You can respond in the chat too. That's fine. Everybody's getting it right. Everyone is responsible for psychological safety. Absolutely. But not equally. Remember, senior leaders are our role models. They signal what is acceptable or not in the organization. So let's go to our second poll. Who determines if an organization is psychologically safe? Who determines if the org is psychologically safe? Indeed, every single member of the organization. All of us matter. We are all part of a collective culture, and we all have a right to say if we feel safe or not. So, to measure psychological safety, Amy Edmondson says we need to explore how safe people feel taking risks. And we can see from the data from Wiley here just last year that senior leaders, our most senior leaders, are the most psychologically safe in the organization, at least by this measure. Investing in psychologically safe culture also has a huge payoff. I know I'm not going to surprise you with this. So Google had Project Aristotle that found that psychological safety is the #1 driver of a team's success. And in 2021, Accenture published a review of all the research that's been done in this space. And it found that, well, I'll let you read it for yourself. All of these fabulous outcomes, right? But I want to specifically call your attention to those last two. Greater skills preparedness. We're talking about skills here, right? And that last one, a higher probability employees will apply a new skill on the job. That's behavior change. That's what we're talking about here. Organizations that are psychologically safe have a 67% higher probability of doing the behavior change, of accomplishing that behavior change. That's pretty incredible. So I mentioned earlier, you're also creating the conditions for innovation, encouraging calculated risk-taking, curiosity, a growth mindset, creativity, all that jazz. But a prerequisite for psychological safety is that everyone needs to feel safe as themselves. And this requires, this requires a strategy around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging that needs to be built into your entire psychological safety strategy. Think about all the energy that we bring to work every day. And think about all the energy that it takes to pretend that we're someone who we're not, or try to fit into somebody else's mold of who they think you ought to be. That energy that those folks are bringing to, that we are bringing to work, is energy that we're not putting into our work. We're putting it into our survival at work. And another threat to people feeling safe as work is bullying and other abuses in the workplace. Excuse me. The Workplace Bullying Institute defines it as repeated harmful mistreatment of an employee by one or more employees, abusive conduct that takes the form of verbal abuse, physical or nonverbal behaviors that are threatening, intimidating, or humiliating, work interference, sabotage, or some combination of those. And this, I understand we have some frustrated, perhaps teachers on here. This is funny. Yes, all of our workplaces need work. So how prevalent is workplace bullying? Let's look at this abusive behavior. 30% of the US workforce self-identifies as having been a target of workplace abuse. That is significantly higher than the global average of 23%. And we also see trends in what targets look like. They tend to be highly independent, self-directed, self-starters, highly skilled and competent, well-liked, kind and generous, ethical and honest, and assume that others are too, which also makes them slow to recognize what's happening to them. They also tend to ignore political games, which unfortunately creates more opportunities for the bullies. Other trends that we see in targets is that neurodivergent folks tend to be disproportionately represented here. People often just think, I just want to be left alone to do my job. We also see women disproportionately represented here, as well as remote employees. So now I want to talk about the impact of this behavior in the workplace. There is extensive harm to everyone involved. The targets talked about 30% of the US working population says they've been a target in the workplace. The colleagues on the other side who have observed this behavior and recognize it for what it is another 19%. So we're looking at a total of about half of our workforce has seen and experienced this directly or indirectly. The impacts are extensive. We have health issues, emotional issues, performance issues. More than that, it's really expensive. $20 billion a year is the estimated cost to US businesses. So how do we do better? I want to introduce you to a term called, the term is upstander. We know the term bystander, right? Bystander doesn't really do anything in the situation. You just stand there and watch. An upstander stands up for what's right. They acknowledge what's happening. They call it by the name that it is. The other thing we can do is act like everybody belongs. Radically accept everyone for who they are. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Positively influence your work community. And make sure that everyone knows that they belong. Again, with your policies, with your words, with your actions. Which brings us back to conscious leadership. So, in the chat, tell me, what can you personally do to drive culture in your organization? What can you personally do? Whatever role you're in, you have power here. What can you do to drive culture?
You have a question in the chat about now neurodivergency. They've heard of it, but aren't familiar.
Yeah. So folks process information differently. Typically, when we talk about neurodivergence, we're talking about often people are talking about folks on the autism spectrum, but it also includes things like ADHD because it affects how we process information, how we intake it. And thank you, Michelle. Excellent. Typically references people on the autism spectrum, or ADD, et cetera. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, we can be upstanders. That's something we can do in our works. Absolutely. We can continue to teach positive leadership skills to leaders with no authority. That's right, because all of us are leaders. We all have the ability to be role models and inspire and have vision and integrity. Absolutely. All right, which brings us to our number 6 way that senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change. So I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to ask you to do something. I want you to champion kindness. What does it look like? We're back in the chat now. What does it look like to champion kindness? And more excellent comments to that last question about culture. Ooh, I love that. Always assume positive intent. Yeah. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Show them some grace. Assume positive intent. Being respectful for one another. Transparency. Gently redirecting when you hear negativity, leading by example, approaching problems with curiosity and not blame. Love that. Ooh, treat others the way you would like to be treated. That golden rule, right? Comes back to that golden rule. How about that? We are in the midst of a mental health crisis, anxiety, depression. We hear about loneliness. So how do we meet our people where we're at, whatever role we're in? We don't know what other people are going through, not in general, certainly not at any given moment. So we got to give each other the benefit of the doubt. You guys called this out exceptionally well. Asking if people are having a good day, they're still coming in. Practicing empathy and inclusion. Ooh, being aware of your own biases and how, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, conscious leadership. All right, so normalizing kindness means that we hold the line on what is and isn't acceptable in our organizations. That means we set an example. That means we hold people accountable. If you see something, say something. If someone is being manipulative or harmful to others, they need to change that behavior or not be there. And we have to treat people equitably. It comes down to fairness. And how do we know if we're being fair? Conscious leadership. So we have covered today, we're not done yet, but we have covered 6 ways that leaders accidentally undermine behavior change. Unconscious leadership, short-sighted thinking, not investing in core skills, not appreciating the centrality of the learning function, not investing in culture, and not normalizing kindness. And I want you to think back to the core skills, to the conscious leadership, culture. All of this falls under leadership development in leading with a growth mindset. That growth mindset, that idea that you can always learn more, do more, grow, improve. If we truly want to lead with a growth mindset as an organization, we have to invest in these things. We have to invest in leadership development. We have to invest in the things that make us better people. We've become stuck in a place where we've tightened our belts and went the way of STEM education. Remember that about 15, 20 years ago? They wanted to prioritize science, technology, engineering, and math. But then they realized we also need a reason to live. So they added in the arts, and now it's STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And before you roll your eyes and just think, well, isn't that just an acronym for everything now? It's not. Where is social studies? I'm talking about history, civics, where we learn the cultural context of our world, where we learn what it means to be a good citizen and member of a community. We've done the STEM thing in corporate, and now we need to add the arts back. When too many learning opportunities look like mandatory trainings, we've stopped investing in the cultural context. Before I joined the corporate world, I was a teacher. And just like I went into teaching to help high schoolers become the best versions of themselves for themselves in our society, I didn't think this would happen, but now I'm doing that for adults in workplaces and organizations. We've stopped investing in culture, and now we're paying a price. I'm trying to be the change I want to see, and I'm asking you to join me. Let's imagine that future that we want, and let's become the leaders of that future now. Let's become the leaders that we need now. I care about learning and enablement in the future of work because individually and collectively, we all rise together. And I think we need to do better. I consistently achieve 80 to 90% behavior change in individuals, teams, and entire companies. And now I'm trying to act as the biggest multiplier I can. That's why I wrote the playbook on the profession and how to get results. I want to help you help yourself. I've gotten a lot of feedback on this book that there's a lot of talk about culture in there. It's a fantastic book about culture. That was not my intent to write a book about culture. But the truth is, you can't get to 80 to 90% behavior change without the bedrock. Remember the bedrock? All those conditions that have to be necessary in the organization, the cultural competencies that make it possible to consistently get to 80 to 90% behavior change. You need that bedrock. And culture is a huge part of the bedrock. So we've looked at, and Bernie, if you could throw that last slide back up, please. Thank you. We've looked at the ways that senior leaders accidentally undermine behavior change. Here are the things we don't want to do. But what if we turn these don'ts into do's? This is just part of the bedrock. Conscious leadership, long-term thinking, investing in core skills, recognizing the centrality of learning enablement's role, investing in culture, and normalizing kindness. So if you want early exclusive access to the Bedrock checklist, go ahead and find me and ping me on LinkedIn. That QR code will take you also to my website, heartwisedev.com. And you can book a complimentary consultation. You can sign up for my newsletter. But if you want that free, exclusive, early access to that Bedrock checklist, go ahead, find me on LinkedIn and ping me, ask me for it. No problem. I'd love to send it to you. And if you want to buy the book on Amazon, you're welcome to. I would encourage you to. Help you help yourself. I want to act as the biggest multiplier I can. And that's what I'm trying to do here. I want you to invest in your bedrock. I want you to invest in yourself and become the best leader you can be, because our workplaces need it and our world needs it. So without further ado, invest in your bedrock, invest in yourself, become a conscious leader. And I'm ready for Q&A. Thank you so much for coming today. I so appreciate all of you being here.
All right, everyone, feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat or in the Q&A panel, or if you'd like to come off mute, please raise your hand and we'll bring you off mute.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Dan has a good question. How do you build influence with senior leaders to work towards the positive behavior changes? It's a great question. So I think in general, when we're trying to build influence, a lot of that is just relationship building. We have to build trust. So I would start there. And then what do they respond to? What does this leader respond to? Often, especially with senior leaders, they're just looking for the bottom line. They're looking for results. I like to talk people through the Kirkpatrick model. I like to talk to them about culture. I love to point to the data. I think data goes a long way to support the good work that we're trying to do. More than that, I would say that since we all influence culture, I would say just showing up as our best selves and developing ourselves is probably an excellent way to do that too.
Lauren, we had a question pop into the Q&A from Don. It says, when working through equity, there is sometimes a disconnect between fairness to all and individual preference. How can a leader approach this without being considered preferential?
Yeah, great question. I think transparency is the answer here. The more transparent we are in the decisions that we make and the intentions behind them, I think the better we're doing with that. And I think there's also an appreciation that things are never going to be 100% fair. No one's ever going to be 100% thrilled with everything. So some of that is also like tempering expectations. But for the most part, we owe each other good intentions, the benefit of the doubt, and good transparency. Thank you, Don. Michelle says she thinks approaching everything from a point of view of creating more equity is a good way to start thinking about it. I would agree with that.
All right. For those of you who are still remaining, we have 8 guests still here, Lauren. If you guys have questions, we'll stay on with you for the next 24 minutes. We're scheduled until 3:30 Eastern, so happy to answer any questions you have. But obviously, if not, feel free to disconnect and have a great rest of the day. We thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much for coming. I so appreciate all of you. I hope this was valuable.